Last year, drug companies hired over 1,700 lobbyists. There are 535 members of Congress. They got 1,700 lobbyists from the pharmaceutical industry. 3 lobbyists for every member of Congress. Meanwhile, as Americans die because they cannot afford the medications they need, the pharmaceutical industry makes higher profits every year. What was going on in Israel before Hamas's terrorist attack? What was going on there? That country had the most right-wing government in its history, a cabinet that included outright racist ministers who consistently dehumanized the Palestinian population. Benjamin Netanyahu, the prime minister, was under indictment for a litany of corruption charges, and many believe that Israel's intelligence, or lack of intelligence, on October 7th had everything to do with his government's preoccupation with his political problems. Before the war, this right-wing Israeli government had systematically undermined the prospects of peace. Netanyahu and his extreme partners in the cabinet had worked to marginalize Palestinian voices committed to peace, pursued settlement policies designed to foreclose the possibility of a two-state solution, stymied economic development in Palestinian areas, and passed laws that entrenched systemic inequality between Jewish and Palestinian citizens of Israel. If we lived in a nation with a rational set of priorities, we would not be giving more tax breaks to billionaires and large corporations, as many of my Republican colleagues want, not at a time when we have more income and wealth inequality than we have ever had. We would not be spending, in my view, $900 billion on the military, while the military-industrial complex makes huge profits and does cost overruns, and while the Pentagon is not even audited. What we would be doing, in fact, if we had a rational set of priorities, like a number of other countries around the world are doing, is to understand that the future of our country rests with the young people in America. That's where our future is. I rise in strong opposition to Senate Joint Resolution 43 that we'll be voting on today. And the reason for that is that we have got to be very clear as to what's happening in America right now. Today, while the very wealthiest people in our country are becoming much wealthier, over 60% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck, and many are working for starvation wages and under really bad working conditions. In America today, while CEOs are making nearly 350 times as much as their average workers, tens of millions of our people in every state in this country are struggling to pay the rent, to pay for the child care they need, to pay for health care, to pay for prescription drugs, and to put food on the table. That is the reality of America today. And while that is true for people of all ages, it is especially true for our younger people who, by the way, if we don't change the nature of our economy soon, will have, for the first time in the modern history of America, a lower standard of living than their parents. And once we understand that, we would be doing everything possible to make sure that every young person in this country, regardless of income, receives the best quality education that our nation can provide. That's what we would be doing if we wanted this country to succeed. Our goal must be to make sure that we have the best educated workforce in the world in a highly competitive global economy. And I would point out that that is not only important for individuals, for the young people themselves, it is vital for the future of our country. Everybody understands that if you have a poorly armed and poorly trained military, they don't win battles. Well, if you have a poorly educated population in a radically changing world economy, dependent more and more on technology, if you don't have a well-educated workforce, our economy is not going to succeed in this global economy. Madam President, in 1990, the United States led the world in terms of the percentage of young people between the ages of 25 and 34 with college degrees. We led the world in 1990. Today, we are in 15th place. Not number 1, not number 5, not number 10. We are in 15th place, behind countries like South Korea, Canada, Ireland, Australia, the Netherlands, and Belgium. 15th place for the richest country on earth should not be the place we are in if we are concerned about the future of this country. But it turns out that on one of the most important matters facing the American people, Democrats, Republicans, independents, progressives, moderates, and conservatives are all united. And they are united on the need to take on the outrageous corporate greed in the pharmaceutical industry and to substantially lower the incredibly high prices we pay for prescription drugs in this country. On that issue, the American people are quite united. Today, millions of Americans are forced to make the unacceptable choice between feeding their families or buying the medicine they need to ease their pain or to stay alive. Seniors from Vermont to Alaska are forced to split their pills in half because they don't have enough money to fill their prescriptions. Madam President, all over this country, every state in this country, the American people are asking some pretty simple questions. They want to know, how does it happen that in the United States we pay by far, not even close, the highest prices in the world for prescription drugs? How does that happen? Why is it, people are asking, that nearly 1 out of every 4 Americans cannot afford the prescriptions that their doctors write? Think about how crazy that is. People walk into a doctor's office to get a diagnosis. Doctor writes out a script. They can't afford to fill that prescription. They get sicker. Maybe they end up in the emergency room. Maybe they end up in the hospital. Maybe they die. People are asking, how does it happen that nearly half of all new drugs in the United States cost more than $150,000 a year? $150,000 a year. How does it happen that in Canada and other major countries, same exact medications manufactured by the same exact companies are sold for a fraction of the price that we pay in America? Simple question. Question Democrats, Republicans, Independents, everybody wants an answer to that. Well, the truth is that the answer to that question, in my view, is not complicated. And in fact, it can be summed up in just 3 words, and that is unacceptable corporate greed. Unacceptable corporate greed. The situation in Gaza today is a disaster. Congress must take action. The administration must take action. The world must take action. Today, 3 weeks after Hamas's barbaric attack against civilians in Israel, which began this war. Many hundreds of thousands of innocent men, women, and children in Gaza are on the brink. Over the past 3 weeks, it is estimated that some 8,000 people in Gaza have been killed in bombings, including more than 3,000 children, and far more have been wounded. More than 1 million people in Gaza have been displaced from their homes, and some 670,000 are sheltering in UN installations where they are down to 1 liter of water per person per day. They lack sufficient food, water, medical supplies, or fuel. The hospitals and medical facilities there are in nightmarish conditions, with hundreds of babies in incubators and patients on life support at risk of death should the generators that sustain them run out of fuel. Corridors are lined with injured and displaced people, and overwhelmed doctors must turn patients away or operate without anesthesia or antibiotics. The humanitarian crisis is dire and getting worse by the minute. There must be a humanitarian pause now so that sufficient supplies, food, water, medicine, fuel, can reach the people of Gaza. If not, thousands more will die needlessly. We cannot allow that to happen. A stop to the bombing is critical to save innocent lives and secure the safe return of hostages. Mr. President, let us never forget the lives of all children, all people are sacred, whether they are Palestinian children, Israeli children, or American children, and we must do everything we can to protect them. But, Mr. President, if we are going to make any real progress in addressing this never-ending conflict between Israel and Hamas, there have been 5 wars in the last 15 years. We need to understand somewhat as to how we got to where we are today. If peace is to come to that troubled region, and if the Palestinian people are ever going to be able to enjoy lives of security and dignity, there must be a vision of where we go in the future. So let us be clear. The living conditions in Gaza before October 7th were horrific and inhumane, and that is before Hamas ignited the latest war. Before this conflict, in Gaza, nearly 80% of people there lived in poverty, and 2/3 were reliant on humanitarian assistance. Almost half the population and over 70% of young people were unemployed in Gaza. What kind of life could they look forward to? Electricity there was intermittent, with 11 to 12-hour blackouts every day. Water and sanitation systems were inadequate, and there were constant shortages of all basic necessities. Gaza was mostly cut off from the world, with Israel and Egypt severely limiting the number of people and types of goods that could go in or out. In fact, many observers describe Gaza as, quote, an open-air prison, end quote. And all of that is before October 7th.